Hi and welcome to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day today. Shall we work with some more washers? This time I'm expanding the repertoire past copper washers. We're going to be working with some other metals as well. It's a really great way to understand how different metals react under pressure. So let's head down to the board, we'll take a closer look at the project and then we'll make some together. So here's the project today. Again, we're going to texture by hammering some washers. I've gone for copper and for brass and for stainless steel. So each of these metals reacts ever so slightly differently under pressure. And we've worked quite a lot with the copper washers, so I thought I'd add some different colours and different feels to these projects. Let me pop the earring up in the corner. So I'm going to be working today with an outer diameter of 9mm, 20mm and 24mm. Now I just liked how these three different sizes looked together. You can obviously play around with whatever you can find at your local hardware store, or you can find them online. I just really like smashing metal, let's be honest. In order to create texture, I'm going to be using my mini block and the ball side of my chasing hammer. And you can really use any ball shaped hammer that you have available to you, but having it be nice and clean is a really good way to start. Now we've worked with copper before together on this channel. This is a 9mm outer diameter copper washer and it's 1mm deep or thick. I don't know what the inside diameter is because I didn't look. What we're going to do is to add some texture to this, and I'm going to texture it both sides. So if you've been with me before on one of my hammering videos, you'll be very familiar with this, so I'll just run through it relatively quickly. What we're going to do is to use pretty much the middle section of the ball side of my chasing hammer. When you're working with the smaller washers, and this is relatively small compared to the other two, but it's not the smallest one we've worked with on this channel, just be mindful of your finger. If you're concerned about your aim in any way, shape or form, do feel free to tape that down or tape half of it down with some masking tape or some electrician's tape and do half at a time. Lift the tape, rotate it around and then do the other half. I'm going to endeavour to not smash myself in the fingertip. So you can see that with copper, it deforms really, really easily. Now, I'm not an engineer, so I'm not going to talk about ductility or deforming metal in any way. But what I will tell you is that the copper one is the easiest, so that's where we're starting. So because of the nature of lovely long drop earrings and the way we're going to connect them, these will swing when they're being worn. So it's very much worth flipping that over and hammering the other side as well, but I'll do that in a moment. So that was the first piece on the agenda today, which is the smallest of our three washers. What I don't want to do is spend too much time demonstrating how to hammer, but what I will do is just show myself hammering each of these materials, so that's brass and stainless steel, and hopefully you'll be able to detect through the beauty of the camera how different they react to being struck with the same ferocity. I'm sure that there's a technical word for that, it's probably force or newtons or something, but as I've previously mentioned, I'm not an engineer, so none of this really makes a lot of sense to me, but hopefully you'll be able to see how different they react. I've textured both sides of that copper washer now, and that is definitely the easiest of the three metals to cause that change in surface shape. There's a whole bunch of science out there. If you care to follow that up, you absolutely can. I'm pretty sure it's megapascals or something like that. So I'm going to do the brass one next, which is the next easiest, as it were. So we've got easy, we've got moderate, and we've got really quite tricky. So I'm going to show you all of them. So what I've done to begin with is to strike that brass with the same force approximately as I used on the copper, and you can see that it is making little dimples, little dents or little texturing points, but they're nowhere near as large. So I'm going to move on now to hammering slightly more firmly and see if we can generate a similar effect. Not that it matters, as long as your two earrings are matching, it doesn't matter if your three washers feature slightly different textural finishes. Now, because when I record myself hammering, I always reduce the volume of the sections where I'm hammering just to preserve your hearing, you may not be able to detect much audibly different, but you may be able to see the force has changed with which I need to cause those little dimples to occur in the surface of that washer. So I'll complete this in just a moment, and what we'll do now is we'll move on to that stainless steel. Now, there are of course very different grades of stainless steel, alloyed and treated in slightly different ways, but today I've just got your bog standard steel washer set from the internet. It wasn't very expensive. So let's try first with the force that I used to cause the change in the surface on the copper. Now, you may not even be able to detect any difference. It's certainly very difficult to see. So we'll try now with the force that we used on the brass. You may well now be able to see that there are surface pits on this washer. What you may not be able to see is that they are significantly smaller than the same force when we added it to the brass washer. So let's now add a little bit more elbow power to this. And to achieve a similar dimpling, I really have had to crank up the power with which I'm whacking that metal. So you can achieve a similar effect, that sort of dimpled, hammered effect, on those three different materials. You just need to work just a little bit harder on the stainless steel than you do on the brass one. So I'll finish off texturing both of these. I finished adding texturing to each of those three washers in those three different materials. Now, you could simply just link them all together with the smallest at the front, followed by the medium, followed by the largest, if you like a shorter earring, and you'll still get that three metal colour contrast. However, I'm going to show you how you can link these with some 0.8mm or 20 gauge copper wire. You could, if you wanted to play around with colour combinations, go for a gunmetal or antique bronze wire to connect these. I'm working with copper because we all know how much I love it. Let's head back down to the board and I'll show you how to link these up now. I have a 3.5 inch length of 0.8mm or 20 gauge raw copper wire. Raw copper is a beautiful medium to work with. It's very smooth and flexible, and it will patina with age unless you treat it with a sealant such as Renaissance wax or something similar to that. I like how the metal darkens, but you may prefer to use an anti-tarnish copper, or again, as I mentioned earlier, you can play around with colour combinations and use a coloured wire to connect everything together. I really love how those three different metals come together and give us this beautiful effect. I'm going to be working with my memory wire finishing pliers, and just to one side of the centre of that wire I'm going to pop a little bit of an angle, and I'm going to use the larger pin on my memory wire finishing pliers. Now, this pin is around about 4mm, so you can obviously use your round nose pliers or your multi-step bail makers. Once I have that little loop shape, I'm going to give it a quick strengthen. Now, if I squish that quite firmly, what often happens is it just ever so slightly becomes larger, which is exactly what I want it to do, because that seems to be just slightly more than 4mm. So I'm going to slide that onto the largest of my three washers. Again, it doesn't matter which order you do them in. I just happen to think that was pretty. And what we're going to do is allow that to sit. Make sure that the washer is in that circular form, but you can allow that to sit sideways on the washer, because it will enable you to grip that circular form and be able to control that whilst you bring the tail of wire firmly around. If you try to keep that wire in 90 degrees opposition to the washer, what can happen is that everything gets a bit squished and out of position. So allow that to sit. It's not completely flat, but nearly flat to the washer, and you'll find that you get a little bit more control. So I'm just going to give that 3 wraps around that core wire. Make sure it's nice and tight before I trim away any excess wire that is available. There's not a huge amount from that 3.5 inch length, but you may find that there's just a little if you're working with smaller washers. So let's give that a nice smooth. When you're happy that that sits neatly so that the washer can just move, it doesn't want to be too grippy, what we're going to do is ensure that that sticky uppy bit doesn't stick up at all and it gets smoothed down against the core. So I'm just going to bring those pliers gently around to make sure that that is nice and safe. Now at this point you'll discover that one of those sides looks neater than the other, because from this angle you can't see the cut end at all. From this angle, you might be able to detect just that little circular flash of metal. So yes, indeed, do give that a squish down, make sure it's as smooth as possible, but I'm going to designate this the front of my design because it's prettier. Now I want to ensure that the loop is at 90-degree right angles to that washer, and I'm going to bring the tail of wire at the top forwards just above that little wrap of 3. I'm going to use the 4mm side again on my memory wire finishing pliers to generate another loop in exactly the same way. Now that went slightly skew-if, but that's absolutely fine. I can push that back into a round form and then give it a bit of a squish and a squeeze. And in this way we can connect onto the next sized washer. So these were all 1mm thick, but they were slightly different sizes. So the largest one was 24 on the outer diameter millimeters, which is an inch give or take. And then we have a 20mm outer diameter, and then the smallest one, which we'll get to in a moment, was just a 9mm outer diameter. Doesn't really matter as long as you've got 2 of each, and then you can make a matched pair. Now again, what we want to do is just let's flip this up the other way, close up that circular form, but allow it to sit so that it's not completely at 90 degrees. You will be able to grip it much more comfortably if you give it that little bit of movability. We're then going to bring that tail around and go over the top of those first 3 wraps, bring that tail to the back. And again, you can trim away any excess, being careful not to cut the wrong bit. Pop it into the melt pot and give that a squish. You could of course go for sterling silver wire if you're feeling opulent. So there's our first 2 links together. Now to link the next 2 together, what I'm going to do, and I'll do it off screen because it's exactly the same technique, is a 4mm loop to attach to the middle sized washer, and then I'll use the 2mm size to attach to the smaller washer. And again, when you create that loop, you will be able to have just a little bit of flexibility to squish it and bring it slightly larger if you need it to be. So I'll link those 2 together and I'll be back in just a moment. So I have linked those 3 washers together with 2 3.5 to 4 inch lengths of that 0.8mm or 20 gauge wire. For the 2 larger pieces, I linked them together with 4mm round forms, and for the medium to small, it was 4mm on the medium size and 2mm gap on the small size, with a third length of approximately 3.5 to 4 inches of that 0.8mm 20 gauge wire. I've just added on to the top of the smallest washer. Now when I come to make a loop so that I can add my earring finding on, I'm going to bring the wire out to the side instead of forwards. I'm again going to use that 2mm pin on my round form. In this instance, my memory wire finishing pliers. And once I'm happy with that round form, I'm going to grip hold of it and take that wire to chase around on top of that 3 little wrap spiral. So we'll bring that all the way to the rear of the design. Make sure that that's nice and firmly in position before we trim away any excess. Just remember that if those spirals don't go as neatly as you want them to, it's a very short amount of wire and it's very easy to just undo them and give that another go. So what we're looking for here is to have those two loops on the smallest or the uppermost of those copper washers, or in this case the copper washer. What you will need to do is make sure that the loop at the top is sideways so that when you bring your earring finding in, it will all fit together neatly. The beauty of copper wire is that if you do accidentally put that loop in the wrong orientation, you do have maybe one chance to just twist that and get it to sit in position. So I've added in my earring finding, and now we have made that pair of mixed metal washer earrings. I hope that you like them. I know that I'm going to take great pleasure in wearing those. I really like how these turned out, and I hope that you will too. And I also hope that you will enjoy smashing metal as much as I do. Do watch those fingertips with that hammer on that block though, because it's very easy to just slightly miss where you were aiming for. Do please remember that when you make your own jewellery, it doesn't have to be expensive to be effective. I made these triple texture drop earrings a couple of months ago now, and the number of people that ask me what designer store I got them from it's just really lovely when you make your own jewellery to have compliments. And again, it really wasn't very expensive to make them. So I'll pop a link up to that video in a moment if you fancy exploring the triple texture drop earrings. But today has been brought to you by 3 different metal washers. Please do remember that dropping a subscription on the channel really does help me to be seen by the wider community. Liking the videos and sharing them across your social media platforms is also a great help, and it doesn't cost you a bean. If you are interested in supporting me further, there are memberships starting from as little as $2.99 a month. Have yourself the most magnificent day, and I look forward to seeing you back here at the Gemhawks Jewellery channel on YouTube very, very soon. Bye for now.